By the time investigators finally stepped onto Fox Hollow Farm on June 24th, 1996, the story had already begun to reveal itself. For years, men vanished from Indianapolis's nightlife, friends had whispered warnings, families had searched, a survivor had described a man using the name Brian Smart, an indoor pool, mannequins, and a terrifying encounter with a hose around his neck.
A license plate had led police to Herb Baumeister, and Julie Baumeister had finally told investigators about the skull her son found in the woods behind the family home. For years, Fox Hollow Farm has sat behind wealth, privacy, and the appearance of a suburban respectability. Now, for the first time, investigators had permission to walk the land and look for what the woods might still be holding. I'm Jimbo.
And I'm Dustin, and this is the Monster of Fox Hollow. At first, the search didn't begin as an enormous crime scene that we know about today. Investigators were not walking with a full map, looking for buried evidence. They were following a trail of pieces that had taken years and years to come together. A missing man, a survivor, a fake name, a skull, a wife who had finally become frightened enough to let police onto the property, while Herb was away. But almost immediately the search changed. The woods behind Fox Hollow did not give up one answer. They began giving up fragments. Those fragments were bones, teeth, charred remains, evidence that the story about an old medical skeleton had not just been strange, it had been a cover for something far worse. The property changed in that moment. Before the search, Fox Hollow Farm was still a nice mansion in the woods, an estate owned by a wealthy businessman and a father of three. From the outside, it could be mistaken for success. But once investigators started finding human remains, that image collapsed. Fox Hollow was no longer just the Baumeister family home. It was a crime scene, and not a clean one at that. Not a place where investigators found a body and immediately knew who it was, how long it had been there, what had happened. This was scattered, burnt, crushed, and mixed into the land itself. It looked less like someone who had hidden a body and more like someone had tried to erase a body.
That is what made the search so overwhelming. There were no neat rows of graves, no intact bodies waiting to be discovered and recovered one by one. The remains were damaged and spread out through the wooded areas behind the house. Some were burned, some were broken into pieces. Some were so small that they looked more like debris than human remains. And they were everywhere. Fragments were spread all over the property. But to trained eyes, every fragment mattered. A piece of bone could belong to someone's son. A tooth could become the clue that gave a family an answer. A fragment that looked almost meaningless in the dirt could later become part of a DNA profile. Investigators had to treat the entire area like the ground itself was evidence.
As the search expanded, the numbers became almost impossible to process. More than 10,000 bone and bone fragments would eventually be recovered from Fox Hollow Farm. That number is horrifying, but it can also be misunderstood. That doesn't mean we have 10,000 victims. It means human beings have been reduced to thousands of pieces. Burning, weather, time, animals, and the deliberate destruction had turned the bodies into fragments. Investigators were not simply trying to identify remains. They were trying to reconstruct identities from evidence that had been scattered across this whole, I can't remember exactly how many acres the wooded area was, but it's several acres of wooded area. And they were talking even in the backyard around the pool, there was fragment. It's just everywhere.
And they said that this is the second highest bone fragments that they're trying to put together to identify people. The only one that beats this is 9/11. So take that into consideration when you're listening about this episode. I mean, that is a lot of people they're trying to identify.
And that's why this is such a forensic nightmare. The remains were, like I said, it's not, they would find pieces, like they found a mandible, but most of the pieces they're going to find a femur here and there. But most of it is it's pulverized. Pieces from different people are going to be mixed together and spread throughout. Some of the fragments were so badly burned, they can't pull, DNA from it, at least pull DNA from it easily. And it's very incomplete. Some of this was damaged beyond what the 1990s forensic science could easily work with back in the day. Dental records could help if teeth were found and if a missing man had records available. But DNA technology was nowhere near what it is today. Genetic genealogy was not a tool investigators could turn to. In 1996, even knowing exactly how many people were represented within this evidence is very difficult. It's still very difficult. Maybe we're getting too far in the weeds on this, but I think they're thinking around 25 victims or so is the number they're believing that it could be. The woods itself had become a puzzle, and every piece of this puzzle was once a part of a person. The discoveries also confirmed what people inside Indianapolis's LGBTQ community had feared for years. The missing men were not just drifting away. They weren't moving without telling anybody. They were not just, vanishing into private lives. Someone or something had been happening. The rumors, the warnings, the missing posters, the survivor's account all suddenly had a physical location. Fox Hollow Farm became a place where years of fear had turned into evidence. And for the families that discovered both, it's devastating but necessary. It meant their loved ones might be found, but it also meant that the answers were worse than people allowed themselves to imagine.
And, Dustin, as you were talking, they said they found teeth, right? Do you think that they can easily identify somebody by just one tooth?
I think the problem with that is it'll have some DNA, but I don't know how much the elements, like how long it'll last, before it kind of goes.
I mean, because they always say, well, we need to look at the dental records, but if you just have one tooth, that'd be really hard.
Yeah, you can't. If you have like a jaw, you could look against impressions that were made, but a single tooth is probably going to be very hard. But if you do extract DNA from that tooth, you have to have somebody to compare it against.
Mm-hmm.
You can rule it out and say, okay, this DNA profile doesn't match this one, and you can maybe come up with like we said, a rough number of 25 that could be involved. There could be more. There may be. Maybe, certain people were treated a certain way in the act of trying to erase them, that all the physical DNA they could pull would be removed.
Mm-hmm.
And you can't, there's nothing to go off of. You're not getting enough to build a profile. It's just, man, I can't imagine, and this is what they found. I'm sure there's still bones.
I'm sure there is too
out there that's deep in the ground that they're trying to hopefully eventually get out and identify.
Right. So while investigators were processing that horror, Herb Baumeister was not standing there to explain it all, like, hey, this is what I did. This is so-and-so, this and so-and-so. He was away from the property when the search actually began. And as the discovery grew, the pressure around him tightened fast. On June 30th, 1996, after learning police had issued a warrant for his arrest, Baumeister fled Indiana and drove north into Canada. That movement matters because it shows how quickly the case shifted. The search begins on June 24th. Human remains are found. The property becomes a major crime scene. Within days, the man at the center of the investigation is no longer just avoiding questions. He is crossing the border. Those final days are when the story gets specifically frustrating because Baumeister was alive while the case was breaking open. there was a narrow window where investigators might have been able to arrest him, interrogate him, confront him with the evidence they found, ask about the names, ask about the missing men, ask about how many victims there were, ask whether anyone else knew anything, ask where else to search, any of these questions that could have been answered. But instead of facing all that, he drove to Ontario. He carried his secrets with him. And when he crossed into Canada, he created the possibility that the central suspect in one of Indiana's darkest investigations might never be questioned at all. Then there is the issue of the tapes. And we need to be careful here because this is one of those parts of the case where the facts, claims, and suspicions do not all sit on the same shelf. Investigators had reason to believe Herb did a lot of videotaping. Later coverage of the case reported that Julie, his wife, said a large collection of tapes that had normally been stored at the house were gone. Retired Hamilton County Sheriff's Office Detective Carrie Milligan later described being shown a storage area where tapes were supposedly kept and seeing a blank space where Julie said they usually were. That does not prove what was on the tapes, but it does raise a serious question. Why were they missing at the exact moment the property was being searched and Herb was too busy disappearing into Canada?
That's a good question. What's the odds that I when you say this, I remember hearing from another podcast. It was a guy who was a news reporter in Indianapolis where I got to find it. And I feel bad for not having it right here. This is where I would insert my ADD break that I'm not allowed to have anymore. But they ran a news article, I guess the FBI or the local police was like, how do you know this? But I think they ran some type of news article kind of saying that they were naming Herb Baumeister as a suspect before it was released anywhere else. It was kind of supposed to have been kind of like a funny thing, but it made it through and aired. So that could have been one of the things that tipped him off. And he may have collected some things before. But like I said, once the police are there, you're not taking nothing and leaving under the disguise of night. You're not coming back. So just the question of what more do we not know is just, it continues to grow. The more you dive in deeper into this, there's two more questions for every answer you think you have. So the tape question gets even darker because investigators also looked at the house itself. In later documentary coverage, Milligan described a vent in the basement that appeared to be suspicious. It was large enough that a camera could have been positioned inside and aimed toward part of the room. Investigators wondered whether Herb may have secretly recorded activity inside the house, possibly sexual encounters, maybe something a little bit darker. Again, that is not the same as saying we have confirmed murder tapes exist or smut films or whatever.
Snuff films, yeah.
That you believe it is. But the possibility matters because it would explain why the tapes may have disappeared, why investigators still talk about them decades later. Almost makes you wonder, his marriage is crumbling. His wife's going to have to come in and get stuff if he thinks that she maybe knows something or was maybe tipped off before this. Did she maybe give him a heads up? Or, you know how it is, if you're with somebody, even if you're not on the best speaking terms, you're going to be able to pick up body language and know something's off. Is that the case? We don't know. There's also a report from Canada, and it makes this whole thing a little bit more unsettling. And later, when we're going back to this documentary that we're going to be covering, or we're in the process of, that was from Hulu. Canadian police said they had spotted a box of tapes inside Baumeister's vehicle just days before his death. I think it was the day before or 2 days before.
Yeah, they found him sleeping on the side of the road, right?
Yeah. And that's something that they had noticed, which, at this time, there's probably bigger crime going on versus a guy sleeping in the woods, but you would think he would run some plates. You would get somebody's identity, make sure that they're okay, that they're not a fugitive on the run. But like I said, they seen those tapes inside his car. If this reporting is accurate, it would mean the tapes may have left Fox Hollow with Herb during the same time he fled Indiana to Canada, which if he's learning about this in real time, like I said, he can't go back and get the tapes. But the tapes weren't ever recovered. Their contents may never be confirmed. Their whereabouts, 30 years later, are still unknown. So the honest way to tell it is just this. There are reports about suspicious and missing tapes, but the public has not confirmed or heard of any footage. We've not confirmed its contents or recovered anything from them. So it just leaves more answers. And then the name Mark Goodyear comes back into the story.
Yay,
the
Mark.
Name that just, it comes back and back and back and back. And
it's like a boomerang, man. You throw it out there and it always comes back.
But the story changes. There's so much into this that I have more questions today than I did 2-3 months ago. Mark claimed he had been forced to watch some of these tapes in 1994. He said the footage was so disturbing that it made him scream, though he did not clearly describe what he saw. This claim is important, but it has to be, handled very carefully because reporting around this newer documentary also notes that Mark's story, has changed multiple times. The first interview he had with the police, he was already contradicting himself in the beginning. He would say one thing and then go deeper about what was going on, and you can't, we're to the point where you can't believe anything that he says.
But here's the problem with that. If the police would have done their job during that interview, none of this, we would have had answers by now, I'm sure.
Coulda, woulda, shoulda. But
right.
Like I said, as we're recording this, the story and what we know has became less. Like we thought we had answers. We thought we knew the players.
You mean it became more, not less.
What we knew became
what we thought we knew.
became less. It's a hold my beer moment because shit's about to go down. Maybe. I don't know. It feels like it. But like I said, the missing tapes are reported. Their contents are unknown. The tapes maybe hold somewhat of a key into maybe who was behind it. Maybe they were just, I don't know if there's like a smut type, tape trading community back in the 90s.
Maybe he just took all the VHS tapes that he got from Blockbuster and copied them, and it has the FBI warning on there. He didn't want to get caught with them, so he got rid of those two, right? He dubbed them.
He could have. I mean, I don't know what maybe that put Blockbuster out of business.
Maybe. It wasn't for me. Lack of me spending money there, I guarantee you that.
Somebody wasn't kind and rewind.
Oh, man. Well, that missing evidence question becomes one of the reasons Fox Hollow never really ever feels fully closed yet. If the tapes existed and if they showed what investigators feared, they could have answered questions Herb refused to answer. They might have shown who was in the house, who had been brought there, what was happening before the deaths occurred, whether anyone else was present, and possibly even whether some victims had never even been identified that they don't even know about yet. But if Herb destroyed them, or he hid them, or he dumped them, or maybe he gave them to somebody else, right? Somewhere that they've never been found, then another part of the truth disappeared with him.
If you're going to get rid of something, or you're going to, trade off something shady in the middle of a national park, or, a park to where nobody's around, would be the kind of place you'd want to do it.
So on July 3rd, 19
cameras on every corner, this is, you could sneak through quietly and not be seen. Can't do that today.
On July 3rd, 1996, Herb Baumeister was found dead at Pinery Provincial Park in Ontario near Lake Huron. He died from a self-inflicted gunshot wound. He left behind a 3-page suicide note, but the note did not confess to murder. It did not name the victims. It did not explain the remains at Fox Hollow Farm. Matter of fact, it did not mention any of the missing men. It did not describe what's on the tapes. It didn't tell investigators where else to look. Instead, the note focuses on his failing marriage, his financial problems at his businesses, and his despair over the collapse of his own life. This is one of the cruelest pieces of this whole story. Even at the end, when the woods behind his home were given up remains of other human beings, Herb's note was about Herb, Herb's marriage, Herb's business, Herb's problems, Herb's ruin. There was no confession, no apology to the families, no explanation, no list, no accountability. He did not even leave investigators the basic decency of a map. He left behind a crime scene and silence.
You know, they said his last meal was a peanut butter sandwich.
Did they really?
I hope it was the driest peanut butter, the driest bread, the worst peanut butter anybody could have. I hope he kind of slowly choked on that.
I hope it was crunchy that got stuck between his teeth too.
I hope he ate some popcorn after it too, and then got popcorn
kernels.
In his teeth. That little piece of the kernel makes me not even want popcorn. And then I don't know. It's been a second since I went through this. And another thing, I think they said like less than 3% of suicides happen where the self-inflicted gunshot is on your forehead. So here you are with a 357. I don't know if it was probably a shorter barrel. So you're holding it and then putting it to your forehead versus, to your temple or under your chin. So that kind of seems a little bit fishy, the way it went down. But let's just keep that little tidbit of knowledge. So Herb's silence changed and shaped this entire case. If Herb had lived, there could have been an arrest, interrogation, a trial. Evidence could be presented to court. You could have had witness testimonies, cross-examinations, and, victim impact statements. Families could have heard the prosecutors lay out what happened. Investigators could have asked him about each missing person. They could have asked him about the I-70 strangler cases because that's happening around the same time. There's been rumors that, he was going along I-70. Maybe it could have been connected. They could have asked about the tapes. What were on those tapes? They could have asked whether he acted alone. They could have asked if more remains were hidden somewhere else. Instead, the central suspect took his own life before the justice system could force him to answer a single question. So after July 3rd, 1996, the case moved forward without him. Herb was dead. The remains were still there. The woods still had to be searched. The fragments still had to be collected. The evidence still had to be cataloged. And most importantly, the victims still had to be identified. That's where the center of the story has to shift away from Herb, because he may be the name people remember, but the real work after his death came, honestly, almost 3 decades later. I know they've been working on this case for it probably took a good 20 to 25 years before interest in really getting to the bottom of this was going to come back up, because we've already talked about most of the investigation was just kind of closed at this point. The main suspect's dead, so we don't have to put more resources into this. Because, like I said, Herb's the one that people remember. His death was, just trying to erase everything that happened. You can't put nothing on him. But several names did become connected to Fox Hollow as investigators worked through the evidence. Johnny Lee, or Johnny Bayer, he was only 20 years old when he disappeared on May 28th, 1993. Jeff Allen Jones was 31 when he vanished on July 6, 1993. Richard Douglas Hamilton Jr. was 20 when he disappeared on July 31st, 1993. Alan Lee Livingston was 27 when he disappeared in August of 93. Manuel Resent, man, my Spanish, you'd think my wife would teach me something, but she don't know nothing either. Resendez is what I'm going to say, Resendez. No disrespect in mispronouncing that. Was 34 when he was last seen on that same date of August 6, 1993. 2 people one day.
You're starting to get bold now, man.
2 people one day. Is there one person behind this or 2? 3.
Or a whole colony of them, a whole coup.
I don't know, but they were last, reported being seen at a gay bar in downtown Indy. You had Stephen Sperlin Hale. He was 28 when he disappeared on April 1st, 1994. Alan Wayne Broussard was 28 when he vanished on June 6th, 1994. We're seeing a lot of names within about a year and a half, in this, what's going to be a relatively tight-knit community. Roger Allen Goodlett disappeared on July 22nd, 1994. That's today that we're recording.
Mm-hmm.
1994. So, it's heat of the summer. It's kids are out of school, so they're been in the summer away. It's sickening. Michael Frederick Kern, Keirin, once again, no disrespect if I say it wrong, was 45 when he was last seen on March 31st, 1995. But that's some of these make me wonder. 34 and 45. Is there 2 different people? Because you have a couple younger. A lot of these guys were early 20s. And now we're starting to get, to 31, 34, 20, 28, 45. Are there multiple people? Because you have different, are you going after anybody that pays you attention? But it just, the mold of what you're looking for, to me, is raising questions. Because if you look at, like Ted Bundy, he had a certain thing that he was looking for. He always kind of went after the same thing, same age, same hair color. But there's a pretty vast difference in the victim. So could there have been more people involved? But that's, this isn't about the people behind them at this point. Daniel Thomas Halloran, Halloran, would not have his name restored until decades later. Jerry Williams Comer had also been publicly linked to Baumeister's suspected victim profile, although they haven't identified his remains at Fox Hollow Farms.
Dustin, I was just noticing something as you were given those dates. Think about this, okay? Most of these men disappeared in June, July, and August, we've seen, right? So that's the summer that the kids would be away.
Yeah.
Okay, now follow me. So they said that his wife would take the kids and go on vacations to her family. I think it was in Ohio, right? If I remember right.
Yeah, I think around Columbus. Or
okay.
Around there.
But it just hit me. What's the other 2 dates on here that we see? March 31st, 95 and April 1st, 1994. What usually happens in March and April? Spring break or Easter. Is that another time where he's like, oh, honey, I got to be here for the businesses. I don't have time to go. Right. I'm just, that just popped into my head right now. I never really looked at the dates like we just looked at them in this episode. And that just stuck out to me. That's very interesting. Very interesting.
Like I said, you have those dates over 2 years, and I'm surprised you don't see more in October.
Right.
Because fall break, but was fall break really?
I don't even think it was a thing back then when I was in school, right? In 96.
So in that time frame, maybe that's why it's because fall break wasn't. Summer break was going to be your opportunity. And
I sure hope that the police Wiseman or whatever the detective was that did this, he's not worth his name and salt, but I sure hope that he looked at Julie's schedule and said, okay, were you gone at this time? Yes. Were you gone at this time? And he went down these dates, and yeah, I was visiting my family in Ohio, or I took the kids up to Indiana Beach or somewhere like that for this day. You know what I mean? I hope they did their due diligence and did this. I'm not saying they didn't, but that's very interesting when that was the last time that they were seen. So,
Yeah, I can't see his wife being involved.
no.
At some point when they're talking about a mandible and a ligature, just sitting in the open in the woods.
Yeah.
At this point, you just wonder how can you not see these things unless you're just
has animals dragged around the body parts further in, further out. Nobody knows. Nobody's ever going to know unless somebody comes and confesses.
We don't know anything, and like I said, we're kind of probably jumping in the weeds again a little bit. But I know one of your questions was how do you get a body from the pool? Like I said, I think they were alive, and there was a shotgun shell that was found there that we kind of mentioned. I think it was in this park. Could have been in the other walk through on Fox Hollow that we're doing. But if you lured them out there, hey, there's this really romantic place in the woods. There's so many ways that you can do it, and then you're not messing up the house. So there's no physical blood spatter or DNA to find inside the house from the crime, just from somebody being there.
Right. And here's something else that we need to point out, right? Dustin and I, we can't say for certain that Herb even killed anybody. Was Herb just a puppet in his own? He had the house, he had the property, and he, out there in nowhere, but he had connections and people knew that, hey, we can go here and do stuff and get away with it because, number one, we can blackmail Herb because he's all part of it. We can blame it on him. I don't know. Jury's still out on this, but we're not talking about Herb. He gets made fun of and all that. That's fine. What we're not going to do is we're not going to victim blame here because the victims deserve to have closure, right? The families deserve to have closure. We do nothing but respect the families. And, the grief that they must have went through from trying to get answers for half a century, 30 years, 35 years, 40 years. It's just unbelievable.
I don't remember the person because my memory is horrible on details. But if you go back and watch the Hulu documentary, you have one of the victim's sons or the potential victim's son. My dad, it was my birthday and he had to work. Hey, here's $20. I'll see you next week. And then his dad disappears. And for how long does he not know that his dad was possibly abducted and murdered? That, you have this kid that, lost it. You have, husband, he had a partner, but you have children and you have dads and mothers and brothers and sisters and cousins and kids that are all looking for closure because they don't understand in that time what's going on. So they're going to have the horrible stuff in their head. Like, I hate my dad because he didn't show up. He abandoned me. Then it can go to, he was maybe a victim of a serial killer. So then you're trying to process that. And then you feel guilty because you didn't know why he was gone. And, it's just a total, mess in your brain trying to process all this stuff. And these families, every single one of them needs some sort of closure. They need to know that they can take it. And I hate it because, they talk about, hey, here's your bag of bones.
Yeah.
At least have, make them a human again and at least get their remains and be able to give them a proper burial and a funeral to where the family can finally put closure on this. Because at the end of the day, until you're confirmed that you were a victim, they're going to hold out some type of hope that they're going to find you. No matter how grim it looks or the percentage, they're going to want to hold on to that hope that one day he may come back home.
Well, it's like the one gentleman's mother, she left a landline until the day she died because he called every weekend and she knows he knew that number. And if there was a chance, if he was somewhere that he needed to call home, he would keep it. And I haven't had a landline in 25 years, I bet.
Yeah. But you're hanging on to that last little string of hope.
Right.
And if he can, contact us, this is how he's going to do it. And I mean, that's no way to live your life because you're put in a situation that nobody should ever be put in.
So those names do something the bone field could not do by itself. They put human lives back into a place where someone tried to leave only fragments. When you line up the dates, the story becomes even more disturbing. May 1993, July 1993, another July disappearance. 2 men tied to August 6, 1993, then 1994, then 1995. This was not one isolated tragedy. This was a pattern of men vanishing from the same broader world while people inside that world were already afraid.
So, Jimbo, when did you start school? You remember?
I graduated in 1996, so this was happening while I was in high school.
When did your school start? Because I remember
like as far as I don't remember ever going back before Labor Day, and we got out at Memorial Day.
So you wouldn't go back until September,
right? Now these guys are going back in August and even sooner. You know,
when the Brickyard was held in August, we would always start school like the day after the Brickyard. So I'm like, we started in August. I remember that. But if you started after Labor Day, I'm thinking August 6th, 2 people. Are you doubling down, or is somebody with you because you know school's about to start and this is your last weekend for a while?
But see, they didn't come around with this year-round school stuff while I was still in school. You know what I mean? But I went to a private school too, so that could be different than a IPS school, public school, or whatever.
That was just kind of what I was thinking.
Yeah.
You know, just what stuck out to me.
So some of these guys, they were barely even adults, 20 years old, 27, 28. Others were older, sure, but still they all had families and friends and entire lives that should have continued. They were not evidence first. They were people first. The early identifications gave some families answers, but those answers came through damage, right? Some remains were matched through dental records or early forensic methods. Others could not be identified with the technology available at that time. That meant families
trying to test it, you know.
That means families could not know Fox Hollow existed, know Herb was dead, know thousands of fragments had been found, and still not know whether their missing loved one had even been recovered from the farm yet. That's a special kind of cruelty, right? The case becomes famous, but some of the men inside the case still did not have their names back. That is why the modern DNA work matters so much. Decades after the original search, investigators and forensic specialists began revisiting the remains with tools that did not exist in 1996. Advanced DNA testing, forensic anthropology, and genetic genealogy changed what was possible. Evidence that once seemed too damaged or too limited could be tested again. Fragments that sat unidentified for years could be connected to family trees. Relatives could submit DNA and help investigators restore names that had been lost for nearly 3 decades. Now, Dustin, I know in some cases they only have a limited number of DNA that they can use, right? I think of John, let's just say John Benet Ramsey, right? Yes, they found some DNA on her T-shirt or underwear. I don't remember, right? So they probably tested that in 1996, even though it wasn't as good as what we have today, right? So every time you do that, you take a little bit of that DNA away, right? There's only so much DNA there. And once you test it, it's gone. You can't retest the same thing.
Can't get it back.
All right. So, and just to tell you how far technology has come just since I graduated, one of my graduation presents in May of 1996, I got a cell phone. Now, gentlemen, ladies, my cell phone was in a briefcase. This thing had to pop it out, and it was probably 1.5 feet long, right? But I was cool because my uncle and aunt had got me a cell phone. But look how far we've come, right?
Then it turned into like the Zach Morris, cell phone. And then, you had the first flip phones that were still like a brick.
Yeah.
Like if somebody tried to mug you and you had a cell phone in like 1998, so you graduated and you said 96?
Yep.
My brother graduated in 99 and he had a Bell style flip phone, which was like you pulled the antenna out.
Yep.
You flipped it down and you could just dial.
Yep.
And the thing was like 4 pounds. Like if somebody tried to mug you, you could swing that phone and probably knock them out. It wasn't, you couldn't put it in your pocket. It wasn't, it was portable like you could have in your car, but you couldn't really take it around with you anywhere. Like you're not going to go to the mall and carry that briefcase. Well, you probably did, but you're not going to go carry those around. It's going to stay like in your vehicle.
That thing wouldn't even fit in your pocket, man. You had to have like a holster for like a gun to put that thing in.
Or maybe it goes like a back. Let me get my phone out of my backpack. It was a different time, and man, I bet you those minutes were expensive.
I don't know. I didn't pay for them. My uncle paid for it.
So Alan Livingston is one of the clearest examples. His remains were recovered during the original investigation in 1996, but he was not officially identified until October 2023 through renewed DNA work. That means he disappeared in 1993, was found in 1996, and had to wait until 2023 for his name to be restored. Manuel Resendez was identified in January of 2024 using these, modern forensic advancements that we've had. Jeffrey Jones was part of the renewed identification efforts. Roger Goodlet's original identification was later supported by, advanced DNA work today. Daniel Holleran was identified in 2025, which showed that even after decades of coverage, podcast, books, documentaries, news articles, and, Fox Hollow could still produce names that had not been fully known to the public. So this changes how the case has to be understood. The victim list isn't frozen. The investigation's not something that happened in 1996 and ended when Herb died. Yeah, it did end for a long time. But, they're back actively working this case, having, a lot of places are helping and volunteering and donating their time and their resources to help go through these fragments to build profiles. So we're still potentially going to be identifying victims. There are going to be unidentified remains. There are DNA profiles that are still being studied. There are, suspected victims whose remains have not even been found yet. And there may be families who don't realize that their missing loved one could be connected to this case. This is why investigators ask people with missing male relatives connected to Indianapolis during the mid-1980s through the early 1990s should consider submitting their DNA. And, we talked about kind of, just very, very briefly, the I-70 Strangler. Herb one day just didn't have, or whoever this person was, unless they, were practicing somewhere else and felt like the heat was getting too much and they relocated. That's possible that, like you said, Herb could be a scapegoat. But you have to perfect your craft. And I hate to even word it that way. He has to find his modus operandi. And were these the first victims, or like I said, did they go back further? Like they said, into the 80s.
And that's why that request of, asking people that have missing men to give their DNA, it's heartbreaking because it means the case may still be reaching families even decades later. Maybe a man traveled through Indianapolis and he never came home. Maybe he was on vacation, just stopped by to have a drink downtown. Maybe he visited, the nightlife scene, had a dance with somebody, but his family didn't know because that part of his life he had to keep hidden from them. Maybe, living a life like that was dangerous or difficult to open up to your family about. Maybe he was disappeared and was written off as someone who chose to leave. Maybe a missing persons report was filed in another city or not filed at all. Maybe the family spent years with no reason to connect their loved one to Fox Hollow Farm. One DNA sample could change all that. And that brings us back to the larger failure around this case. The men targeted were living in a world where being gay could still mean losing family support, employment, housing, safety, or public sympathy. Some were open, some were not. Some had families fighting loudly for them. Some may have been easier for the system to overlook. Herb did not create that prejudice, but he benefited from it. He operated in the cracks created by silence, stigma, and indifference.
And I think he went after like what a lot of serial killers go after, or whoever was involved, responsible. They're looking for who they can, pull away from society and not be noticed. It could take years, months, like you said, may not even ever know, because you could have been from somewhere else and made your way here. Like I said, you could have been traveling.
Yeah, well, think of like the BTK killer, man. It took him. He's an old man now, and they finally got him. So
yeah, and it's one of those. It's I'm going to go after the people who society overlook.
Yep. So once the discoveries at Fox Hollow became public, the case exploded. Reporters came rushing in. Headlines spread. The estate became infamous, and the details were impossible for people to ignore. The wealthy-looking property, the indoor pool, the mannequins, the skull explained away as a medical skeleton, the thrift store owner, the double life, the flight to Canada, the missing tapes, the suicide note that talked about his problems but not the men in the woods. It had every detail that makes a case stick in the public imagination.
But that's also the danger of telling it. The weird details can swallow the victims if we let it. The mansion, the pool, the tapes, the conspiracy theories, the ghost stories, and the questions about accomplices. All of that can take over until the men become just, hiding in the background. And they cannot be in the background. They are the story. Johnny Bayer, Jeff Jones, Richard Hamilton Jr., Alan Livingston, Manuel Resendez, Stephen Hale, Alan Broussard,
Roger Goodlett, Mike Hearn, Daniel Halloran, Jerry Williams Comer, and the identified men still waiting for names.
Every fragment collected was a refusal to let the destruction become complete.
Hey, Dustin, you stopped at, you need to go back and start with Roger Goodlett. You froze for like 20 seconds.
Roger Goodlett, Mike Kieran, Daniel Halloran, Jerry Williams Comer, and the identified men who are still waiting to be named. This is why the work after Herb's death matters so much. Every fragment collected was a refusal to let the destruction become complete. Every test, every category entry, every DNA profile, every family reference sample, every lead, throughout the genealogy can become a way of pushing back against what's already been done. Herb died without confessing, but he did not get to erase everybody. The bones remained, the evidence remained, the families remain, and eventually the science has improved. The process is slow and complicated. When remains are burned, and so, they're just so void. Investigators have to decide which fragments are most likely to produce DNA. They have a group of remains when possible. They have to compare all these profiles. They have to build family trees, and they have to be careful. They have to contact relatives who may have an idea about their family history and about, if it's connected to one of Indiana's darkest cases. And when they do succeed and the names are restored, they have to notify the people who may have spent decades living in uncertainty, searching, waiting, and hoping for answers. That's not just science. This is grief work. I mean, it's such a mental thing. Like, you're doing such a positive, job and impacting the lives of all these people associated. But at the end of the day, I mean, it's gotta be, you're getting, fulfillment from figuring it out. But man, the grief just has to be overwhelming to where to stay positive. You're around this so much.
Yeah. And that grief work is still happening. Fox Hollow Farm is not just a case from 1996. It is still an active identification effort. Investigators are still reviewing evidence. Forensic teams are still working through remains. Families are still being asked to help. Every new identification changes the story, not because it gives Herb more attention, but because it takes attention away from him and gives it back to the men he tried to reduce to fragments. That may be the closest thing to justice this case has left. Herb escaped the courtroom. He escaped trial. He escaped the sentencing. He escaped being forced to answer questions about the victims, the tapes, the missing men, and the remains. but he did not completely escape the truth. The truth stayed in the ground and in the bones, in the evidence boxes, in the missing persons files, and in the memories of people who refused to stop asking questions.
And the truth still has unfinished business. The missing tapes have never been found. Their contents have never been confirmed. The full victim count remains uncertain. Some remains are still unidentified. That's a tongue twister. Some suspects could have been victims that have not been recovered. We still have the I-70 strangler question that kind of hangs around the case. The possibility of accomplices or people with additional knowledge still get debated. And Mark Goodyear's role remains both crucial and complicated because his original account helped point investigators towards Fox Hollow, while later claims, he changes everything. He flips what you think you know is now been debunked by him, maybe. And you can't ignore that. Those questions don't erase the facts. The facts are that the men disappeared. Mark survived. And I hate to just use that word survive because, like I said, my feelings change constantly. An encounter with a man he knew as Brian Smart. Police traced, back to the alias as being Herb Baumeister. Julie Baumeister allowed the search, and investigators, they found, that 10,000 bone fragments at her house. Herb fled and died without confessing or telling what he may have known. Was he being blackmailed? Was there more people? Was there a bigger ring? We don't know. If the tapes ever did exist, the way investigators have feared, they're gone. The note gave no answers. The victims who left behind, are just being identified, one at a time. It's a slow, tedious, process.
So the story does not end at Pinery Provincial Park. It does not end with a gunshot, a suicide note, or a suspect taking the easy way out. It continues in the labs. It continues with DNA. It continues with the families. It continues with every restored name, and it continues with the questions Fox Hollow left behind. The bones told investigators that the rumors were true. The suicide note told them Herb was never going to explain it. The missing tape suggests there may have been more evidence no one would ever see. And the victims' names remind everyone what the case was really about. So, Dustin, I think on our next episode, it'd probably be our last episode. That's our last episode for right now because this case is always getting updated. We're going to be dropping when we get new information. But the reason I say the last one's going to be our next episode because we're up to the point where the story, along with our companion episodes with the Tragedy of Cinema covering the Hulu documentary, which we'll cover those. I'm dropping them. You'll probably have one or two by the time this one comes out. And you'll get the story from the documentaries. But Dustin and I had the privilege of going actually up to Hamilton County. We met Jeff Jellison, the county coroner. We met the detective. I got his name. I think it's Mike something.
Steve Ainsworth.
Yeah.
Listen to me.
Yep.
You're just like my wife. You don't want to listen.
What? No. We met them. We got to thank them for what they did. We asked them some questions, but they had a big thing because they had identified another victim. And we've seen, if you ever watched the documentary, we've seen the statues, we've seen the memorial they have there, and it's very surreal when you go. We've drove by Fox Hollow. We know the area now. We can put pictures of this, like there's a Target right around the corner now. That wasn't there. A lot of these houses weren't there. So we have a visual picture of what it looks like. And on the next episode, we're going to tell you what happened at that event that we went to, and we'll wrap it up with that. And then we'll go back to, we got Jackie already back with some episodes that we've got recorded and everything. So we'll get back to a regularly scheduled program. But we believe that this story was so important.
And it's to be one that's this big to not be nationally known. And
right.
Like I said, we don't want to glorify anything that Mark Goodyear, Herb Baumeister, anybody else connected to this is doing. If anything, we want to bring awareness to the case and that it's still active, it's still going on, and there's still ways people can help. The University of, was it Texas or one of the Texas universities has been vital in helping this case.
But we'll cover that next episode, Dustin. Don't get too far.
All this costs money, but here's the thing you have to remember too. It's an active investigation.
Right.
They're going to keep as much evidence as they know close to the vest.
Well, it was a closed investigation when Herb committed suicide, but the state police went back in and reopened the case to help identify these victims. So stay tuned for that. And just remember, Dustin, remember one thing.
That's my line.
Just remember one thing. Steak is well done with A1. And with that being said, the deeper you dive,
the darker it gets.
Like my steak.
I don't think you get any darker than well done steak. Well done steak.
Well done A1.
Are you kidding me?
I don't kid about steak.
And there's no such thing as good color. So we're gonna solve this. I'm 100%, 1,000% confident that you've got two bulldogs on this case that are not going to give up.
Yeah. But we'll have to wait that for a future episode. Bye.
Save that for another day.